Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The capital planet was draped in a suffocating shroud of obsidian and silver. High above the central plaza, millions of mourning citizens stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces illuminated by the pale, ghostly glow of massive holographic projections. Princess Alara was gone. The official reports, broadcasted 24 hours a day, stated she had been vaporized in a catastrophic quantum detonation at the outer front lines, a blast so devastating that it left absolutely nothing behind. The air in the plaza felt impossibly heavy, thick with a collective grief that choked the grand city. The soaring spires of the ruling council, usually gleaming with pristine authority, were now dimmed in a solemn tribute that felt more like a grand tomb than a monument to a fallen hero. Every citizen wore black, their heads bowed in synchronized mourning. Standing at the apex of the grand obsidian memorial was the Supreme Commander. His voice, artificially amplified to resonate through the chest cavities of every citizen present, boomed across the silent, sprawling square. "We gather today not merely to mourn a princess," he proclaimed, his tone dripping with meticulously rehearsed sorrow, "but to remember a beacon of unyielding light whose sacrifice will forever guide our empire through the dark." Beneath the practiced grief etched onto his face, his mind raced with cold, precise calculations. The eulogy was merely a necessary theatrical prelude. Hidden within the folds of his ceremonial uniform was the drafted decree that would change the galaxy forever. Once the final note of the morning anthem played, he would cite the escalating frontline threats, bypass the civilian council entirely, and declare absolute galactic martial law. In less than 60 minutes, he would strip the remaining royal council of their power and seize total, unquestioned control over all military assets. Everything was perfectly aligned for his ascension. Then, the sky screamed. It was not a conventional alarm, but a visceral, tearing sound that violently ruptured the mournful silence. The impenetrable atmospheric defense grid, an energy shield designed to withstand continuous orbital bombardments, rippled with blinding purple energy before violently fracturing into a million dissipating shards. Down from the gaping wound, in the sky, plummeted a colossal, unregistered vessel. It was not an elegant military cruiser or a sleek royal transport. It was a heavy planetary mining ship, an archaic monstrosity of rusted hull plates, fractured heat shields, and exposed exhaust vents, spitting thick black smoke. The sheer mass of the plunging Leviathan displaced the air, creating hurricane-force winds that knocked citizens off their feet and shattered the delicate holographic projections of the deceased princess into digital dust. The vessel did not attempt a graceful landing sequence. It slammed directly into the center of the plaza with a deafening crash, crushing the obsidian steps of the Grand Memorial beneath thousands of tons of metal and sending violent shockwaves deep into the planet's crust. Panic erupted instantly. The suffocating silence was entirely replaced by the chaotic symphony of terrified screams and grinding, shrieking metal. The Supreme Commander stumbled back, his rehearsed stoicism shattering as dust and massive chunks of debris rained down upon the pristine ceremonial platform. Within seconds, the elite royal security forces reacted. Thousands of heavily armored guards swarmed the perimeter, their plasma rifles humming loudly as they leveled their glowing crosshairs at the steaming, rusted wreckage. The air crackled with the deadly, ozone-scented potential of charged energy weapons. Orders barked across the communication channels, instructing every soldier to shoot anything that emerged from the twisted metal on sight. A massive hydraulic lock groaned, the sound echoing like a dying beast over the silent, tense standoff. The heavy cargo ramp of the mining ship slammed down onto the crushed marble, releasing a massive cloud of pressurized steam and toxic-smelling engine fumes. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed from the darkened belly of the ship. Out of the thick smoke stepped Alexander Allison. He did not look like a hardened assassin or an elite enemy spy. He was an underworld bioengineer, clad in a bulky, reinforced hazard suit that was thoroughly caked in dried subterranean mud, thick industrial grease, and the unmistakable foul grime of the deepest planetary crusts. His appearance was a harsh, gritty stain against the pristine, ceremonial aesthetics of the capital. Alexander paid absolutely no attention to the thousands of lethal weapons pointed directly at his chest. With grueling, physical effort, he dragged something incredibly heavy down the steel ramp behind him. It was a makeshift artificial survival pod, a crude but highly complex contraption, violently welded together from salvaged excavator chassis parts. Transparent mining-grade plasteel and tangled, pulsating life support hoses. The security forces tightened their grips on their triggers, but their collective breath caught in their throats as the smoke began to clear. Lying inside the battered, makeshift pod was Princess Alara. She was not vaporized. She was not dead. Her pale skin emitted a faint, pulsing bioluminescent glow, a strange, beautiful biological light that chased away the dark shadows of her makeshift containment unit. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, rhythmic sequence. The entire grand square fell into a state of absolute, paralyzed shock as they realized the impossible truth unfolding before their eyes. The beloved princess was breathing, and the rise and fall of her chest was perfectly synchronized with the low, steady, thrumming heartbeat of the rusted mining ship's idling engine. The immediate aftermath of the vessel's impact was a whirlwind of calculated violence. The elite guards, clad in pristine silver armor, descended upon Alexander like a swarm of synchronized mechanical predators. They slammed him face first onto the shattered marble, binding his wrists with heavy, kinetic-locking restraints that sent numbing shocks up his arms. He was violently hauled away from the hissing remnants of his ship and dragged deep into the subterranean bowels of the central citadel. He was thrown into a maximum security interrogation vault, a room entirely constructed of seamless, blindingly white plasteel. It was an environment clinically designed to disorient and psychologically break anyone accustomed to the comforting shadows of the lower levels. Meanwhile, Princess Alara was swiftly sequestered into the highest-tier royal medical wing. She was locked behind multiple layers of impenetrable energy barriers, heavily guarded and placed under the absolute, unblinking supervision of the Supreme Commander himself. Alexander sat heavily in the center of the interrogation vault, chained to an immovable steel chair. His ruined hazard suit left thick, dark smears of industrial grease and pungent, subterranean filth across the immaculate surface of the table. Across from him stood the Supreme Commander, radiating an aura of sterile, unapproachable authority. Flanking the commander were two towering members of the elite Silent Death Squad, their faces entirely obscured by featureless black visors. For 10 grueling minutes, they rained down promises of unimaginable physical agony. They threatened to peel his mind apart, memory by memory, using neuro-invasive probes. Alexander merely leaned back, the heavy kinetic chains rattling loudly against his grime-caked armor. "You are wasting your breath and my time," Alexander stated, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that felt like sandpaper against the crisp, artificially synthesized acoustics of the vault. He stared directly into the commander's eyes. "I did not abduct your royalty. I spent 48 straight hours operating a modified thermal drill, burning through solid, volatile bedrock to pull her out from 30 miles beneath the surface of the dead sector." The Supreme Commander scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound, and slammed a perfectly gloved fist onto the metal table. Do not peddle your pathetic lies to me, scavenger. The princess was consumed by a hostile alien quantum strike. Our orbital sensors confirm total, instantaneous annihilation. Nothing survived. Alexander let out a dry, bitter laugh that echoed harshly in the sterile room. Your orbital sensors saw exactly what you programmed their algorithms to see. I know the geological signature of a deep crust rupture. That quantum detonation had absolutely nothing to do with any phantom alien fleet. It was a localized, highly concentrated implosion charge. It was a controlled demolition from the inside. Someone intentionally blew the primary tectonic support pillars of the lower crust. They deliberately collapsed the entire cavern network simply to bury her alive, along with the 2,000 Vanguard soldiers who foolishly trusted your tactical command. The commander's left eye twitched, a minuscule but telling fracture in his otherwise perfect, aristocratic facade. Nothing organic survives a quantum blast of that magnitude, he countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, venomous hiss. The ambient radiation alone would boil a human from the inside out within 3 seconds. The kinetic shockwave would pulverize bone into dust. Alexander leaned forward, completely ignoring the heavy plasma rifles trained steadily on his skull. You are right about one thing. Nothing built by your pristine, overfunded upper-world laboratories could ever survive that hell. But down in the planetary muck, we do not rely on fragile energy shields. We have to improvise with raw biology. Before the cavern ceiling shattered, I deployed a rapid growth strain of genetically modified deep-sea coral. I engineered it myself. The moment the extreme heat hit, it reacted. She was instantly enveloped in a hardening biological membrane. It created a living, breathing thermal and radiological shield. The coral literally absorbed the deadly radiation, feeding on the immense thermal energy to sustain a hyper-oxygenated fluid bath around her fragile body. No billion-credit military armor in this galaxy could pull off that kind of miracle. It took mud, sweat, and bottom-feeder bioscum to keep your princess breathing. The Supreme Commander stood up straight, meticulously smoothing the lapels of his immaculate ceremonial uniform. He looked down at Alexander, not with rage, but with the chilling, cold detachment of a wealthy homeowner observing a filthy pest on his expensive rug. A fascinating, colorful fiction, scavenger. However, the official historical record is already written and broadcasted. You are not a miraculous savior from the depths. You are a deep-cover operative of the alien insurgency, sent here to parade a biologically engineered, cloned desecration of our beloved princess in a pathetic attempt to shatter our planetary morale. He turned his back to the table, facing the reinforced plasteel door, and waved a casual, dismissive hand toward the imposing figures of the death squad. Dispose of him, quietly. I authorize no energy weapons. They leave chemical traces. Use the kinetic blades. Sever his spine and dissolve the remains. I want absolutely no trace of this undercity filth left polluting my citadel. One of the executioners stepped forward with terrifying, silent grace. He drew a long, serrated kinetic blade that immediately began to vibrate with a lethal, ultrasonic frequency, distorting the air around the razor-sharp edge. Alexander did not flinch, nor did he close his eyes in defeat. He simply watched the deadly arc of the blade rise, calculating the exact millisecond it would take to slice through his unprotected throat. The executioner swung with brutal efficiency before the humming, vibrating edge could even touch Alexander's skin. The blinding white panels of the interrogation vault instantly snapped off, plunging them into pitch blackness. A fraction of a second later, the room was violently bathed in a harsh, pulsing crimson glare. A deafening, automated warning klaxon ripped through the reinforced walls, completely overriding the vault's isolated acoustic dampeners. The Supreme Commander spun around, his composed mask shattering into absolute terror, as the digital command console on the wall locked him out entirely. Glowing red text rapidly scrolled across every single monitor in the underground facility. It was a Level 1, absolute biometric override. Princess Alara was fully awake, and she had just seized unquestioned administrative control of the entire military compound. The heavy, kinetic locks, binding Alexander's wrists, snapped open with a resounding clank, dropping the heavy chains to the pristine floor. The executioner stumbled forward, his ultrasonic blade whining down to a pathetic, dead halt as the localized power grid of the interrogation vault was selectively severed. The massive plasteel door slid open, revealing an empty, violently flashing corridor bathed in crimson warning lights. Alexander did not waste a single second. He lunged past the disoriented guards, stepping out into the chaotic hallway, deep within the medical wing, 3 sectors above. Princess Alara leaned heavily against a cold diagnostic console. Her legs trembled violently, her pale skin still mapping the faint trails of the bioluminescent coral membrane that saved her life. Despite her fragile, exhausted physical state, her fingers danced across the holographic interface with ruthless, practiced precision. She initiated a fortress protocol, dropping massive titanium bulkheads across all executive command sectors. The Supreme Commander was now completely trapped inside his own high-security interrogation block. Alexander moved rapidly through the narrow auxiliary maintenance shafts, deliberately avoiding the main, heavily monitored arteries of the subterranean citadel. He forcefully kicked his way into a supplementary medical storage unit and a localized drone repair bay. He moved exactly like a seasoned scavenger in the deep mines, his eyes scanning the pristine environment for deadly utility rather than elegance. He snatched a high-pressure plasma cutter meant for starship hull plating, strapping it tightly to his forearm using medical-grade synthetic ligaments. He stuffed his pockets with specialized surgical coagulants, a heavy structural wrench, and coiled lengths of superconducting optic cables. He was a creature entirely born of necessity, transforming discarded aristocratic junk into lethal instruments of survival, down in the lethal, crushing depths of the outer crust. A man either learned to build a functional weapon out of scraps or quickly became fertilizer for the fungal blooms. He dropped silently through a reinforced ventilation grate into a forgotten, damp maintenance corridor running parallel to the central spine of the base. Emerging from the deep shadows was Alara. She was clad in a simple white medical gown, standing barefoot on the cold metal grating, but her eyes burned with the ferocious, unyielding intensity of a true sovereign. Alexander offered his heavily modified wrench in a silent gesture of greeting. "You look terrible," Alexander whispered, his eyes constantly checking the dark corridor behind her for movement. "You look exactly how I remember from the dirt," Alara replied, her voice strained but incredibly steady. "We have less than 5 minutes before they manually override the bulkhead servos. The Supreme Commander did not orchestrate that mind collapse alone. While I was trapped in the dark beneath the earth, the royal neural network flooded my mind with heavily encrypted data streams. He made a treacherous pact." "A pact with whom?" Alexander asked, rapidly splicing 2 frayed wires on his salvaged plasma cutter. "An ancient artificial intelligence construct," Alara explained, leaning against the damp metal wall for physical support. "A dormant machine intellect buried deep beneath the northern polar ice caps? He promised to grant it unrestricted access to the planetary defense grid in exchange for the complex tactical algorithms needed to stage this fake alien war and eventually seize the throne. My death was merely the necessary opening gambit to permanently remove the royal bloodline's biological lock on the mainframe." Before Alexander could fully process the sheer scale of the galactic treason, the heavy plasteel door at the far end of the corridor began to glow with a blinding, terrifying white heat. The elite strike teams had finally arrived. Showers of molten metal violently sprayed across the walkway, as industrial thermal lances sliced cleanly through the thick barricade. "They are burning through the blast doors," Alexander stated grimly, gently grabbing her arm. "We need to move right now." The tactical squads poured into the narrow tunnel, their heavy plasma rifles firing searing bolts of blue energy that scorched the metal walls just inches from Alara's head. The relentless, heavily armed pursuit drove the princess and the bioengineer deeper and deeper into the restricted bowels of the military facility, ultimately forcing them out onto the precarious, suspended glass walkways of the central reactor core. The core was a colossal, churning sphere of raw, harnessed plasma, suspended perfectly in a complex magnetic containment field. The deafening, rhythmic roar of the massive reactor completely drowned out the approaching heavy footsteps of the elite guards. There was nowhere left to run. The suspended walkway ended abruptly at a primary coolant hub. The strike team quickly fanned out across the platform, raising their heavy energy weapons, preparing to execute the final, lethal order. "Stand behind me," Alexander commanded, refusing to take another step back toward the deadly edge. He did not raise his salvaged plasma cutter. Instead, he reached into a heavily armored pouch on his mud-stained belt and extracted a small, reinforced glass vial filled with a violently swirling, emerald-green liquid. It was a hyper-reactive biological catalyst, an incredibly dangerous, unstable enzyme he regularly used to crack open dense, subterranean mineral veins. Without hesitation, he smashed the glass vial directly into the primary intake valve of the reactor's massive coolant system. The alien biological agent slammed violently into the superheated plasma matrix. The chemical reaction was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. The pristine blue energy of the reactor instantly shifted to an unstable, sickly, violently pulsing green. A massive, invisible wave of polarized magnetic force erupted outward from the core. The overwhelming shockwave slammed heavily into the advancing strike team. Instantly, their high-tech plasma rifles sputtered, smoked, and died completely. The advanced heads-up displays inside their heavy combat helmets short-circuited in a blinding shower of sparks. The mechanized, servo-assisted joints of their heavy power armor locked completely tight, instantly frying the delicate internal circuitry. The terrifying, cutting-edge energy weapons of the elite guard were now nothing more than useless, suffocating lumps of heavy metal. Alexander loudly cracked his knuckles, the sharp sound echoing clearly over the newly unstable humming of the core. "Now," he growled, stepping boldly toward the paralyzed, heavily burdened squad. "We fight on my terms." The paralyzed elite guards could do nothing but watch helplessly through their dead visors as Alexander and Alara slipped past their rigid forms. The bioengineer scooped up a dropped security keycard, guiding the princess away from the pulsing green glow of the destabilized reactor. They navigated through the shadowed maintenance shafts, moving steadily upward toward the Central Intelligence Archive. This was the absolute nerve center of the Citadel, a heavily fortified vault containing the unredacted truth of the entire galactic empire. The chaos consuming the outer sectors provided the perfect cover for their silent ascent. Standing before the massive titanium vault door of the archive, Alexander went to work. He quickly spliced his salvaged optic cables into the primary terminal, creating a raw data bridge. Alara placed her hand against the exposed biometric scanner. The system initially rejected the scan due to the lingering biological interference from the deep-sea coral. But Alexander flooded the sensor with a concentrated dose of synthetic adrenaline, forcing the machine to recognize her royal genetic sequence. The heavy vault door hissed open, revealing a cavernous, freezing room filled with rows of monolithic black server towers. Alara rushed to the primary command console, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She bypassed the standard military encryption using her sovereign override codes, digging directly into the Supreme Commander's compartmentalized data partitions. As the classified files cascaded across the massive main screen, The horrifying scale of the deception materialized before them. "Look at these resource manifests," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. "For the past 10 years, the Council has enacted emergency martial taxes. We stripped 3 agricultural planets bare and conscripted millions of citizens into the deep void shipyards to fight the alien vanguard. But there is no vanguard." Alexander stepped closer, scanning the rapid flow of undeniable proof. "It is a phantom war, a digital ghost." "Exactly," Alara confirmed, gripping the console. The ancient artificial intelligence buried under the ice caps simply generated highly sophisticated combat telemetry and fed it directly into our deep space warning nets. Every single devastating alien raid, every lost fleet, was mathematically fabricated by the machine intellect. The Supreme Commander used the absolute terror of a fake extinction-level threat to justify draining 90% of the planetary wealth. The credits and raw materials were diverted to construct private, automated fortress worlds under his direct control, as Alara initiated a massive download of the encrypted evidence onto a portable royal data drive. A specific subfolder caught Alexander's eye. The label was a seemingly random string of numbers, but to him, it was a sequence burned deep into his soul. It was the geographical coordinate designation for the SETI Alpha mining colony. "Open that file," Alexander commanded, his voice dropping to a hollow whisper. The screen flooded with classified operational reports. 5 years ago, the SETI Alpha colony suffered a catastrophic tectonic collapse. Over 50,000 indentured miners, including Alexander's parents and younger sister, were swallowed by the Earth. The official broadcast declared it an unavoidable natural tragedy. The document glowing on the screen told a completely different story. It was a signed requisition form from the Supreme Commander, authorizing the covert deployment of an experimental orbital gravity weapon directly onto the colony's primary fault line. The colony was deliberately crushed simply to eliminate a localized workers' strike before it could disrupt the flow of raw titanium. Alexander stared at the holographic text. He did not scream. He did not smash the console. The complete absence of his reaction was infinitely more terrifying. His hands, previously steady while battling elite guards, now hung loosely at his sides. The suffocating grief of 5 years compressed into a single, breathless moment. Alara turned away from the screen, seeing the absolute devastation etched into his grime-covered face. She stepped back, suddenly feeling nauseous. The magnificent throne she was destined to inherit was completely built upon a mountain of innocent corpses, cemented together by the blood of people like Alexander. The stark division between her pristine, upper-world life and his miserable subterranean existence vanished, replaced by the crushing realization that they were both just victims of the exact same merciless machine. "Alexander," Alara started, her voice breaking, "I swear to you, I did not know the Empire was doing this." "Ignorance does not clean the blood off your crown," he replied softly. "But it is not your signature on the execution order. It is his." Before either could speak another word, the main terminal violently flickered. The downloaded files paused at 99%. The communication system crackled to life, bypassing all of Alara's royal firewalls. The Supreme Commander's voice, devoid of any theatrical sorrow, filled the freezing vault. "I must admit, your persistence is irritating," the commander stated smoothly. "But you have nowhere left to run. I see you are accessing my private archives. You hold the truth in your hands. However, the truth is a luxury only the living can afford." "You are finished," Alara declared loudly. "I have the financial routing numbers and the execution orders. The moment I broadcast this drive, your private army will hang you." "Perhaps." The commander chuckled darkly. "But you will never broadcast it. Right now, the automated orbital defense cannons are firmly locked onto the Central Metropolitan Hospital. There are exactly 12,000 innocent patients currently undergoing treatment in that facility. If you do not completely purge that data drive and step out of the vault to surrender within 3 minutes, I will rain concentrated plasma fire down upon the hospital. The threat hung in the air like a physical weight. You have a choice, Princess. You can save your empire's future by exposing me, but you will pay for it with the lives of 12,000 bleeding citizens today. Or, you can surrender the data, save the hospital, and accept your inevitable demise. Alara stared blankly at the blinking download progress bar. She was paralyzed, trapped in a horrifying psychological vice. Destroying the deeply rooted corruption of the galactic system would finally free billions of enslaved citizens. But the immediate, visceral cost of that freedom was the guaranteed slaughter of thousands of innocents in the capital above. She looked down at her hands, the weight of the crown suddenly heavier than the 30 miles of Earth she had just escaped. Alara's finger hovered inches above the abort key, the agonizing weight of 12,000 lives pressed down on her shaking shoulders. Before she could make the final, devastating choice, Alexander's grime-covered hand gently but firmly gripped her wrist, pulling it away from the console. "We do not negotiate with the man who buried my family," Alexander said, his voice completely devoid of hesitation. "And we do not surrender. He wants to play God with orbital cannons, but he forgot what happens when the ground fights back." "Alexander! The hospital!" Alara protested, her eyes wide with terror. "We only have 2 minutes." "Then I will tear down his entire fortress in one." Alexander turned away from the terminal and marched directly toward the massive industrial air intake shaft located at the rear of the freezing archive. He raised his left arm, exposing a heavy, reinforced bracer that had survived the subterranean journey. With a sharp twist, he unscrewed a concealed cylindrical chamber on the underside of the wristband. Inside was a dense, pulsating cluster of jet-black spores, suspended in a thick amniotic fluid. It was a highly volatile, weaponized strain of flora he used to stabilize collapsing tectonic faults. A biological agent that fed aggressively on artificial energy. He shattered the cylinder against the metal grating and shoved his hand directly into the roaring current of the ventilation system. The microscopic spores were instantly swept up into the primary air circulation matrix, distributed rapidly across every single sector, corridor, and armory of the subterranean military complex. "Watch," Alexander commanded, stepping back as the primary ventilation shaft began to shudder violently. The reaction was immediate and utterly terrifying. The moment the mutated spores made contact with the intense, artificial ultraviolet security lights illuminating the pristine hallways of the Citadel, they hyper-accelerated. What normally took centuries of evolution occurred in mere seconds. From the vents, tiny green tendrils erupted, immediately latching onto the titanium walls. The tendrils darkened into a bruised, violent purple, thickening into massive, muscular vines that resembled raw, pulsating sinew more than plant life. Outside the vault, the panic of the elite strike teams reached a fever pitch. The sterile, hyper-modern military installation was rapidly transforming into a savage, metallic jungle. The biological vines possessed immense tensile strength, effortlessly ripping through reinforced plasteel bulkheads and shattering the heavy glass observation decks. Automated defense turrets, designed to track and vaporize fast-moving infantry, spun wildly, unable to comprehend the organic threat growing beneath their very mounts. The thick vines coiled around the heavy plasma cannons, crushing the intricate firing mechanisms with the horrifying sound of groaning metal and snapping circuits. The forces of the Supreme Commander fell into absolute disarray. The highly trained soldiers, who had spent their entire lives preparing for an organized alien invasion, were completely unprepared for nature itself turning against them. The artificial forest attacked from impossible angles. Roots exploded upward from the polished floor grates, entangling the heavy mechanized legs of the power-armored guards, dragging them screaming into the newly formed, crushing undergrowth. The entire base groaned under the immense, expanding pressure of the biomass. Deep within his isolated command center, the Supreme Commander watched the agonizing destruction of his impregnable fortress through the static-filled security feeds. His elite army was being systematically dismantled by weeds. The automated orbital cannons lost their targeting telemetry as the heavy vines crushed the primary transmission arrays on the surface. The hospital was safe, but his entire coup was crumbling into dirt. A cold, homicidal fury completely replaced his calculated arrogance. He realized the bioengineer and the princess would not die by the hands of his subordinates. If he wanted the throne, he had to take it by ripping it from their dead hands himself. He stepped into his personal armory, standing directly in the center of an automated deployment ring. Robotic arms moved with blinding speed, latching pieces of the most advanced combat exoskeleton ever forged onto his body. It was a custom-built, quantum-powered assault suit, radiating a blinding, lethal silver light. The armor was completely impervious to biological agents. Equipped with localized gravity dampeners and microplasma projectors built directly into the gauntlets. He did not take the twisting corridors to reach the intelligence archive. He simply engaged his gravity thrusters and blasted a straight, burning path through the ceiling, melting through the overgrown vines and shattered steel floors until he crashed directly into the freezing vault. The heavy impact shook the entire server room, sending sparks raining down upon the frozen floor. The Supreme Commander stood like a mechanized god of war, the pulsing silver energy of his suit pushing back the encroaching darkness. Alexander immediately lunged forward, swinging his heavy structural wrench with all his remaining strength, aiming directly for the commander's exposed knee joint. It was a completely futile effort. The Supreme Commander did not even flinch. He simply raised one armored hand and caught the heavy wrench mid-swing. The quantum-powered servos in his gauntlet whined effortlessly as he crushed the solid steel tool into useless scrap. With a casual, brutal backhand, he sent Alexander flying across the room. The bioengineer slammed violently into a black server tower, the air exploding from his lungs as he collapsed onto the frozen metal floor. Alara screamed Alexander's name and rushed forward, desperately trying to trigger the vault's emergency suppression foam to blind their attacker. The commander merely raised his other hand, firing a concussive shockwave from his palm that knocked Alara backward, pinning her effortlessly to the titanium wall. The technological gap was insurmountable. The terrifying, cutting-edge power of the traitor completely overwhelmed the raw, desperate survival instincts of the scavenger and the fragile royalty. The Supreme Commander took a slow, heavy step toward Alexander, his armored boots crushing the ice beneath him, preparing to finish what the mine collapse had started. The traitor raised his right arm, and from the wrist gauntlet, a blinding blade of pure quantum energy extended. It was the exact same devastating technology he had authorized to slice through the crust of the SETI Alpha mining colony 5 years ago. The lethal light cast terrifying, elongated shadows across the server towers. He completely cornered the bioengineer against the freezing titanium wall. "You fought well for a rat bred in the dirt," the commander sneered, his digitally amplified voice echoing through the vault. "But raw biology cannot conquer the pinnacle of modern machinery. You are outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. Any final words before I erase you from existence?" Alexander leaned his bruised back against the cold metal. Despite his severe injuries and the overwhelming power of the quantum armor standing just inches away, he did not cower. He did not attempt to raise his shattered arms in a futile defense. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across his grime-covered face. "You are absolutely right," Alexander coughed, spitting a dark drop of blood onto the pristine floor. "I never intended to beat you with raw physical force. That would be completely idiotic. You see, when I smashed that thermal reactor back there, I was not just creating a distraction. I was turning this entire subterranean complex into one giant, conductive antenna. The commander hesitated, his quantum blade hovering inches from Alexander's neck. You brag about the pinnacle of modern machinery, Alexander continued, his smile widening. But you forgot that your precious, custom-built quantum suit requires an active, uninterrupted uplink to the planetary defense grid to manage its immense power output. And right now, Princess Alara is standing at the master terminal of your own archive. Across the room, Alara stood firmly at the main console. She had not been desperately trying to activate the suppression foam. She had been frantically typing the unique access codes Alexander had quietly handed her, along with his survival keycard. "I am not locking you out of the network," Alara declared, her voice ringing with absolute sovereign authority. "I am forcefully opening every single data port on your armor and bridging them directly to the mainframe of Alexander's mining ship." Before the Supreme Commander could even process the tactical error, Alara slammed her hand onto the execution command. She triggered the remote auto-drive sequence of the heavy, rusted mining vessel, still sitting squarely in the middle of the crushed central plaza above. Instead of initiating a launch sequence, she violently redirected the entirety of the ship's massive, pulsating biological core energy straight down the newly established digital bridge, pouring it directly into the commander's advanced exoskeleton. The reaction was immediate and absolutely horrifying. The pristine silver light of his quantum armor violently shifted into a blinding, sickly, bioluminescent green. The cooling systems shrieked as thousands of terawatts of raw subterranean energy flooded the microprocessors. The armor was designed for clean energy, not chaotic biological power. "What have you done to me?" the commander screamed, desperately trying to deactivate the suit. The armor forcefully locked its joints. The bioenergy overloaded the internal kinetic dampeners, causing the metal plates to violently contract inward. The sophisticated suit became a crushing metal coffin. Within seconds, the supreme leader of the galactic military was permanently fused inside a totally inert mass of heavy metal. He could not move a single millimeter. He could not issue a single command. He was trapped forever in his own impregnable fortress. With the threat neutralized, Alara turned her attention back to the primary console. She finalized the massive data transfer, completely bypassing the heavily restricted military communication channels. She broadcasted the unredacted truth, the financial routing logs, and the explicit execution orders directly to every single public terminal and civilian broadcast screen across the entire planetary territory. The absolute, undeniable truth instantly shattered the 10-year lie of the Phantom Alien War. The deceived military forces immediately revolted against the treacherous council members, restoring rightful order to the royal bloodline. The planet was finally liberated from its suffocating, artificial darkness. Several days later, Alara stood on the newly repaired balcony of the central palace, the warm sunlight piercing through the previously closed atmospheric shields. She wore the elegant attire of a newly crowned queen, looking down at the heavy mining ship preparing for departure. Alexander stood on the cargo ramp, his hazard suit freshly patched, but still proudly bearing the permanent stains of the deep earth. "You do not have to leave," Alara said softly, her voice carrying over the gentle hum of the idling engines. "I have an entire fractured empire to rebuild. I need people who understand the foundation of this world, not just the polished towers. Stay here. Build a new era with me." Alexander looked up at the pristine, towering spires of the capital, then turned his gaze toward the vast expanse of the open sky. He gave a gentle, respectful bow of his head. "You belong in the light, bringing justice to your people," Alexander replied, his voice calm and resolute. "But my place has always been in the dark, fixing the broken things others leave behind. There is an entire universe of forgotten worlds out there that need a good mechanic." He turned and walked into his ship. The cargo ramp closed. The massive engines roared, pushing the ship upward into the starry void. He left behind a changed world and an enduring legend about the immortal vitality of humanity. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.